Okay, now to giving away my biggest productivity secret. I think it's one of the most underappreciated default macOS apps. See if you can notice anything unusual there. So I watch pretty much every video that YouTube recommends me with people sharing their workflows in macOS, all kinds of tips, unusual apps, especially when it's specifically for developers. That's probably one of my favorite types of content. And this video will be my tips that I haven't seen anyone sharing before. And I mean, it's YouTube, someone has probably talked about something similar, but I will be showing my personal workflows and how certain apps or system features enhance those workflows, right? So it will be quite personal and hopefully somewhat unique. And by the way, if you're new to the channel, I'm Mykola, I'm a software engineer based in Germany. I built this app called Checker and share my progress in these devlog style videos. I will leave a link in the description to the whole playlist. But I also want to talk more about general topics like tools I use and books I read and my workflows, this kind of stuff. Anyway, I appreciate if you sat through this long intro, but now finally to the first tip. So one of the cool features of macOS Dock is that besides having apps there, you can have folders for quick access. And I believe by default only downloads is there, but I also keep their screenshots. It's very convenient to take a screenshot and straight away be able to drag and drop it to some application. But here you can already see the issue. In case your latest download was some media file, image or video, it's not super clear anymore, especially when you have more apps in the dock and it's much smaller. Which folder is which one is download, which one is screenshots. That's because by default macOS displays them as tags to highlight some latest content in the folder. But for download, it's actually better to switch it to be just a folder. It will get this nice standard icon from macOS. And usually preview for download folder doesn't make much sense because it's just a mix of random files most often. For screenshots, it's much more convenient because you can visually distinguish now between those folders. But besides these two folders, I also like to keep my ongoing projects in dock, also for quick access. When I'm working on a video like this, for example, my previous video, I usually drop it in the dock so I can easily drag and drop folders in and out. And also for my coding projects, I also drop them in the dock. And now we have again the exact same issue that it's not easy to distinguish between those folders without needing to remember order of the folders or reading those labels. And it's a bit annoying when you're in the flow, when you just need quick access to a file and you misclick on some folder. It's a bit annoying. There is no easy way in macOS to assign some nice icon like downloads folder to custom folders. But fortunately, there is an app called Image to Icon. And it does a bunch of stuff, but I use it only for assigning custom icons to my folders in the dock. This is the app. It's very minimal, but very nicely done. It's a native macOS app with all kinds of animations and stuff. It's really nice to use. First, you can drag and drop an image here to create a custom icon from this image. But what I usually do, I just type a text to create an icon from a text or some emoji or SF symbol. So for example, let's make a folder icon from this emoji. You just type the emoji and then it gives you some presets for the icon. In this case, I want to have it for the folder, so it makes sense to select this one. And now from this point, you can export and use this icon just as a file, but you can also drag and drop your project folder or whatever folder you want to use. Just drag and drop it into this window and it will automatically assign the icon. You can already kind of see it's there, but if I go to the dock and switch to folder view, the icon, you can see it's there. And the same I can do with SF symbols. If you haven't heard about SF symbols, it's an application for macOS, but also a very large library of default symbols that you can see across macOS, iOS, all the Apple systems, but they also give it to developers to use in their apps. And you as a user also can download this app and use it anywhere in the system where they use this default San Francisco font. If you open SF Symbols app, there will be a huge library of all kinds of symbols. I, for example, want to have something with a video, then you Command C to copy the symbol, and you can just copy paste the symbol right here. And again, it will give you presets with folders. I would select this one, and for my video project, I just drag and drop the folder here, and it will replace the icon as well here. Now I'm going to switch to the folder in the dock, and you can see now it's much easier to navigate those folders and distinguish between them. And again, this app is super nicely done. I believe it's free to use, but there is a one-time like $10 payment to unlock all the features. Definitely try it out. Now, this one is specific for SwiftUI developers, so if you're not one of them, feel free to skip this one. There are chapters in the video, but if you're interested, you know, when you open Xcode documentation and you try to search for a specific SwiftUI thing you want to look up, it will give you this thing in every single Apple framework that's out there. But you see, I know that this API exists in SwiftUI, but it's not even on the list here. I cannot even get to it easily. And eventually it got a bit annoying, so I started to go directly to SwiftUI documentation on a web, where it's much easier to find stuff specific to SwiftUI. So this API, for example, clearly it's there. But then they announced this feature in Safari where it can wrap websites into kind of native applications. So I thought this might be a perfect use case for this feature. And in order to do it, you just go to the roots of the documentation, then share, add to doc, name it something useful like SwiftUI docs. It won't let me save it because I already have it, but now I have it running all the time next to my Xcode. Here it is. And when I need to look up something SwiftUI specific, which these days is 90% of the cases, I just go directly to this app. You might have noticed though that by default it gives you this default Apple icon for the app, and I have this nice SwiftUI logo, which was surprisingly hard to find in decent resolution, but I will leave a link in the description if you want to download this logo and use it as an icon as well. And then the application itself lives in your home directory, then applications. And in order to change the icon, you just open this get info and then drag and drop the image into this icon, and it will replace it. Okay, so now let's talk about Stickies. I think it's one of the most underappreciated default macOS apps. It's been around for 25 years and I don't think it gets enough credit. And if you never used this app, and maybe you even didn't know that it comes with your macOS, it basically what it says in the title is just a kind of the sticky note that you can put wherever on your screen, and then you can dump your random stuff into it. Raycast have this floating window feature, which is kind of the same thing as a permanent place on your screen where you can put your random thoughts into. But Stickies, I think it's still better because it has a few features that I will show later. But first, what problem does it solve for me? It boils down to two things, I would say. It's context switching and reminders. And I can show you how it realistically looks for me when I work on a project. For example, in Xcode, I work on my app, and this thing is always here in the corner, and I find some place in the code that I want to improve something there, but it's not part of the scope of the current feature I'm working on. So I will just switch to sticky and set for myself a reminder to come back to this place later. And the important thing here is that it's always visually on the screen, because I could set myself a reminder in Raycast, right? Or in any modern to-do application, there is some wait for quick entry. But problem with those is that my brain at least still considers this a context switch, and I kind of feel a mental effort where I close that quick entry window and I need to spend energy to get back to where I was before, even though it was for like 10 seconds maybe. While with this thing, because it's visually there all the time, it doesn't feel like that much of a context switch to me. And it might get a bit annoying because still it takes a bunch of space on the screen, and Xcode, even though it's a busy application, it's not that busy as Blender, for example. You can see that density of the UI in Blender is kind of ridiculous, so it usually covers some important part of the UI. And the cool thing is that I can collapse a sticky into this thin strip, and this feature is missing for most of those quick entry applications. And usually I can find a place in the UI which I don't care about at the moment, and I can put this sticky there. And there is still the topmost entry, and that serves as a kind of reminder for myself that something is there. It's not just an empty note, and I better to open it and see what's inside. Which kind of brings me to the second use case I have with this app, is actually reminders. So Stickies has replaced for me probably 90% of reminders which I previously was entering in default reminders app, Todoist. I tried a bunch of to-do apps, of course, but now most of the day-to-day stuff, like I need to follow up with someone over email or in Slack, I need to go back to some part of the code, I need to do a PR for my colleague. All of that stuff previously I would put into a dedicated to-do app, but now most of those I just put into the sticky, and because it's right there on my screen all the time, it's really hard to forget about them. And I still use to-do app, I use Things and Reminders app, both for a bit different purposes, which I won't talk about right now, but it's mostly for stuff that have dedicated date or time, and I don't need to think about those tasks before that date. And because it already serves as a sort of a constant reminder, there is no need for notifications, and there is no separate system where I would need to go through my reminders in a separate to-do application to make sure that I don't forget about something. This is a small one, but fixes a huge frustration in my computing life. I'm not sure if other people have this or a similar issue, but when I type a lot of text, and especially when I'm coding, I make the same typos in the same words. For example, when I type a word return, and if you're a developer, you know how often you have to type this word. And for me, I somehow always swap these two letters, so the word becomes this, which is wrong. And what's funny, it's not these two letters or these two letters, it's always these two. I'm not sure, it has probably something to do with how I position my fingers and some muscle memory issues, but the fact is I couldn't solve it by just discipline and retraining myself, so I had to come up with other solution. Unfortunately, there is an app that helps me kind of mitigate this issue a bit. The app is called Rocket Typist. It's a snippet expansion app. Like many others, you have abbreviations, and then when you type those abbreviations somewhere on the web or in the system, it will expand into bigger snippet. I have it here in my menu bar, and there is this snippet editor where you can see all my kind of snippets, but in reality they are just abbreviations that are incorrect version of the words. This one is for the return, and the snippet is the correct one. So when I type the incorrect abbreviation, it will swap it into the correct word. So when I type here now the incorrect version of return, you see that it swapped it immediately into the correct one. And I do it again. Oops. It swapped again. And I have a few other snippets there. Apparently I struggle with words that start with letter C. It seems like I'm not fast enough to let go of the shift key, so the next letter in the word also comes out as uppercase. So I also have all those snippets to fix those issues, like count, column container. Here same thing, if I type count, it swaps it into the correct version, and then column also swaps. And what I like about Rocket Typist specifically is that it does this swapping kind of inline without waiting for a special character like space or new line, and I don't have to press some keyboard shortcut. It swaps the word and I can still type the rest of the sentence without waiting for Rocket Typist to finish the job. And I've tried a bunch of other apps that's supposed to do the same thing, like Raycast for example has snippets feature, but it doesn't work in Xcode for some reason, and Rocket Typist does the job in Xcode no problem, even though it's a bit slow there. Other apps that are kind of dedicated snippet expansion apps, they also don't work in some apps that I've tried. Rocket Typist so far, even though it's not 100% accurate all of the time, sometimes it swaps the word but leaves one or two letters from the incorrect word, and I have to go back and fix that. But 90% of the time I would say it works fine, so for me it's still worth it. And I believe it's a free app to start with, and then it's $20 one-time payment to unlock all the features. Now, super random one about the default macOS emoji picker, the one that you bring by hitting Ctrl-Command-Space. So if you have some special characters or emojis that you don't use that often, but once you need them, it's really hard to find in this UI. I, for example, always struggle to find this comment symbol. I always forget how it's properly called. But turns out if you click this button next to the search input, you can find the symbol, and then you can hit add to favorites. And then you hit the button again to bring back the normal UI. And now there is a separate section for your favorite characters, and it will always stay there. Super convenient. I'm not sure, maybe I'm the last person to discover this feature and everyone knows about it, but hopefully it was useful for someone. Okay, now to giving away my biggest productivity secret. It's a thing that I consider essential to my overall setup, and I will show you in a bit, but first I recorded a split screen video where on one side I will be using macOS, just normal day-to-day stuff, and on the other side you will see what I do on the keyboard while doing all these actions in the OS. See if you can notice anything unusual there. Okay, let's start maybe with Safari, where I would go to Mastodon or maybe Threads and type something in their post input box. Hello world. Oh, I don't want to actually post it, so I will delete it, just close the page, and now maybe go to Figma, where I have designs mockup for the landing page for my app. Here I would leave a comment, maybe leave this button out for the first version. Okay, good. Now let's go to notes. I have a script for the current video here, by the way. I don't want to forget to include all the links to all the apps I've mentioned in the video, so I will write a reminder for myself. Links to all the apps I mentioned. Okay. Now let's maybe go to system settings, and here I'd like to change a highlight color for the system. So now I have blue. Let's maybe change it to yellow. Why not? Okay. And in Xcode, maybe leave some silly print statement, hello, and the same thing for VS Code. So log world. Okay, so at this point I'm pretty sure you understand where I'm going with it, but I hope you don't know exactly how I do it. So now let's go back to the normal video where I explain everything. So you probably noticed it, right? While doing all these actions in the US, navigating the UI, editing text, I never took my hands off the middle row on the keyboard, and I never touched the default arrow keys. And in fact, I don't even remember when was the last time I had to touch those keys unless it's on someone else's computer. So instead of using arrow keys to navigate left, right, up, down, I use letter keys H, J, K, L while holding the caps lock key. And this might seem like a small thing, but for developers who are watching, they probably immediately recognize how useful it is to have this kind of layout across the system. That's because a lot of developers use this kind of navigation when they're editing code. And this called Vim style navigation. It's originated from this very old text editor called Vim, and there is a whole movement behind it, and a lot of people like it. But what I have here, it's not limited to any specific editor or any specific application for that matter at all. It's across the whole system. I can edit text on the web in my code editor, I can navigate the system UI, I can do whatever actions I would normally do with arrow keys, because basically macOS thinks that I actually press the arrow keys. There is a layer between me pressing the key and the system command that gets sent to the macOS that kind of translates those letter keys with caps lock to proper arrow keys. So now how to make this all work. The setup might seem a bit advanced at first, but in reality it's just 3 simple steps that you do once and then you forget about it. It just works. So the core of this whole setup is this app called Hammerspoon. It's a free open source utility with relatively large community around it. And in general, it's a Mac automation tool. You can write scripts and then run it through this application to do all kinds of crazy stuff in macOS. You can automate everything pretty much. But what I use it for is only for this navigation thing. So the first step is to install the app. It's just normal macOS application. I believe once you install it, you need to give it accessibility permission, which is kind of a normal thing for this kind of utility that does automation on the system. But by itself, it cannot do anything. You need to give it a config file with proper instructions of what to do. And this, for example, is my config for this navigation remapping. And it might look a bit intimidating at first, I understand, but when you start to really look at it, there is not much going on. Here, for example, the section that remaps the arrow keys to HJKL, and the first parameter is the modifier key that I need to hold with the letter key in order to invoke the arrow key. And this one says control, and in the beginning, if you remember, I said that I was holding caps lock, but turns out I cannot use caps lock here directly because it's not technically one of the standard modifier keys, which are Shift, Control, Option, Command. But I still want to use caps lock in this case because it's really conveniently positioned, and my finger, my left pinky is pretty much always on the caps lock, and I can easily press it. So there is no this broad hand movement going on. But fortunately, what can I do? I can remap caps lock to be control, and I can do it right in macOS settings. I will show you later. But first, what you need to do with this file, you need to either copy paste it or download it from GitHub. I will, by the way, leave a link in the description to this file. It's public on my GitHub page. So you download this file, and what's important, you need to put it into your home directory under .hammerspoon folder, and you need to call it init.lua. So if I, for example, go to my home directory, it's hidden. This folder .hammerspoon is hidden because it has dot in the beginning, but I can navigate with Shift-Command-G, and I can go to this folder. You can see it's there, and it has init.lua, which is exactly this file I have here on GitHub. So you put the file there, and now how to remap caps lock key to be control key. It's actually really easy. You go to system settings, you look for modifier keys, then customize modifier keys, and here you see you can remap caps lock to be one of the standard modifier keys. In my case I use control. I hope you're not a big fan of the default caps lock feature, otherwise this setup needs to be modified a bit. So once this is done, only thing that has left is to open Hammerspoon and hit this reload config, so it reads the file that you put into the .hammerspoon folder. And now in preference I recommend to set this checkbox to launch Hammerspoon at login. Then you just close the thing and pretty much forget about it. It just works. And that's the thing I like the most about this setup, because there are other apps that claim to give you this Vim style navigation across the system, but in my experience they are very fragile and often don't survive next macOS update. Hammerspoon, even though it's not as easy to set up initially, I've been using it for the past 5 years probably. It has been through multiple macOS updates, reinstalls, backup restores, and as I said, once you get through the initial setup you just forget about it, it just works. If you're a person who enjoys this kind of tips, you will probably like the video about my note-taking system, and my next video will be another devlog where I finally will be launching my app and sharing the initial results and feedback. So I hope to see you there. Thank you for watching. Cheers.